Yeah,
And it's
exactly.
only the hydrogen or you other things
And
also?
no, it's climate and energy. So
Okay.
it's really a major, yeah, yeah, yeah. So that is also why, of course, we can't delve as deep into every topic
Yeah.
as we sometimes like to. Yeah. So it always depends a bit on kind of what our partners work on, what we see as most relevant in a
And who are you
sub-region.
from?
Always depends. We always have local partners on the ground.
Yeah.
In Morocco, we work with the policy center.
Shall we start? Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Nadia Mossari. I'm a lawyer, a energy lawyer based in Casablanca, and I'll have the pleasure to share this session this afternoon with our great panelists. The topic this afternoon is about policies for green hydrogen. With rising climate change challenges and issues, the use of green hydrogen has become and emerges as a promising remedy. The use of green hydrogen has also become and is today as the answer of the question of providing clean energy. In that context, public policies and effective policies are crucial and play a crucial role in developing the sector and develop green hydrogen technologies. To encourage investment in that field, having tailor-made policies are crucial and are key to promote and develop technologies. Key policies areas, and this is something that we probably discuss with our panelists. We cover several areas, mainly R&D, research and development, funding, tax incentive, financing incentive, international cooperation. This is something that we are going to discuss this afternoon, and of course, regulatory framework. These policies aim mainly to be supportive and viable environments to attract private investments and thus develop energy projects. This session, I hope, will provide a platform to share ideas and approaches on policies that might apply to developing green hydrogen projects. So this afternoon, I have the pleasure to discuss this topic with our panelists. So the first one is Yorgo Chatzimarkakis, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Hydrogen Europe, Mr. Frank Butas, Chairman of MENA Hydrogen Alliance, Ms. Veronica Eftel, Director Regional Program, Energy Security and Climate Change, Middle East and North Africa at the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and Mr. Alexander Chavarot, the Financing Director of CWP Global. So we're going to start first with the recording of Mr. Chatzimarkakis, who unfortunately hasn't been able to join.
Ladies and gentlemen, many thanks for the invitation to this extraordinary event under the patronage of His Majesty. Morocco is one of the key countries when it comes to the energy transition and the sustainable energy transition towards power mix. What does that mean? It was invented in the hydrogen family, because if you have power, renewable power, that you want to store, hydrogen is a very, very good solution, because by splitting water into oxygen and hydrogen, you have basically a molecule that can last much, much longer than an electron. And basically, if you combine that then with nitrogen from the air or with green CO2, you have an X, you have basically a different fuel that you can use. And this is why it becomes so important and prominent right now. We live in a world that has understood that the impact of humans to the globe, to our world, to our home is negative. We have seen that the linear economic approach to just get something out of the planet, be it raw material, be it minerals, be it fossil energy that we then emit, has negative impacts on many of our countries. We have seen the earthquake in Morocco, which has nothing to do with climate change, and I would like to convey our deepest regrets, and also like to convey that we are thinking of the Moroccan people suffering very much from the earthquake. But we have also seen other catastrophes being caused or enhanced by the boiling planet that we as humans have indeed initiated ourselves. And this is why getting away from the linear model, getting something out of the earth and burning it towards a circular economy, where we understand that we can use basically nature as a role for photosynthesis, where we take from the sun the energy and we store it in molecules and use it in molecules. This is the power to X concept. This is where Morocco is a future giant of this development. Why is this? Because first of all, you have excellent engineers. So Moroccan people, Moroccan minds are extremely talented, and this is a very good precondition. Secondly, you have access to seawater, covering the 80% of our planet. So seawater can be salinated with renewable energy, and you have plenty of access. Plus, you have a lot of renewable energy that can make this process happen. And the last element is you are connected with pipelines. Now, in a world where energy crisis was not only caused by climate effects, but also by a war, especially in Europe, the invasion of Russia into Ukraine, people understood that we need to rethink energetic concepts much faster than we thought we would need to. And this makes molecules that are green or clean and substitute the fossil molecules. That makes them so important. So all in all, it's about substitution. It's about leaving fossil energy there where it is and to substitute it by circular, by power-based energy. We believe that in Europe, we started with a quite robust system of legal elements, which is good. We are at the moment starting to de-risk the activities to purchase, to produce pillows, to purchase hydrogen and its carriers, how to export its derivatives from other countries like Morocco. And this is the process that could be described by the Hydrogen Bank. And we are extremely open for close collaboration as European Union, and especially the European industry that I can speak for, to a close cooperation with Moroccan industry, but also with Moroccan producers. I myself have been inspired by Desertec in early years when I was quite young, to enter into politics and to enter into hydrogen. So Desertec was always the guiding star, and it was invented in Morocco. So I owe Morocco basically very much, which is why I wish the whole conference, but also the whole concept, all success it deserves. And again, Hydrogen Europe and the hydrogen industry in Europe is extremely pleased to be invited and to cooperate closely. Thank you very much. Shortly.
Well, my first question is for Mr. Wouters Frank Wouters. So we talk a lot about green hydrogen as being the future of cleaning our energy. So in your view, what would be the policies that could accelerate the market, the hydrogen market?
Yeah, thanks. Well, first of all, let me reflect a little bit on what Her Excellency the Minister said this morning, that half of us are evangelists and half of us still need to be convinced somewhat. And well, I mean, I'm an evangelist. I've been an evangelist for more than 30 years. It was always renewable energy. Now we don't need to preach for solar energy any longer, but we still need to convince people about hydrogen. And let me just take us back, because, you know, where we've seen a lot of progress is on green electricity. Obviously now we know it's the cheapest form of electricity going forward. A new renewable energy is cheaper than anything else, even, you know, already written off fossil fuel power plants. So that is now well underway. We've understood it. You know, this sort of the success story. More than, you know, half of all electricity is now in many countries, or more even, green, and that is on an exponential growth path. But we also have to realize that electricity is only 20% of all final energy. So the real problem is with 80% of all the energy that we use, which is coal, it's diesel, it's you know, all the things that we like to, you know, basically burn. You know, humanity has an affinity to creating fires, whether it's in an engine or in a power plant. We like to burn things. And that, of course, causes climate change. So we need to fix that. One of the solutions is hydrogen. So if you're looking at molecules, you know, first of all, we need to electrify as much as we can, which we're doing. I mean, expansion of electricity use, direct electrification is, of course, extremely important. We see that in the growth of electric vehicles. We see that in electric heat pumps in houses, etc. So electrification is a major element of the energy transition. But I haven't seen a credible scenario where that can go way beyond 50%. So that would already be 2.5 times more electricity than we have right now. But at 50%, you know, it's already now a challenge. The grid is a challenge almost everywhere on the planet. 2.5 times more of that same challenge is just going to be very, very difficult. So then the question is 50%, what are we going to do with that? We have biomass, we can make green hydrogen, or we can continue burning hydrocarbons, and then we have to, you know, capture the CO2 and store it. Of those three options, biomass, we're competing with food, we have land use, monocultures, biodiversity, all of these things. So it's not, you know, infinitely expandable. CCS, yeah, it'll happen a little bit, but I don't think, you know, that is, first of all, you don't have the geology everywhere to do it. You still need point sources of carbon emissions, etc. So that's also limited. So the largest of the three is actually hydrogen. My point is that I think it's much bigger than most people think. If I look at a lot of scenarios, 5%, 10%, you know, maximum 18%, I think it's 25% or more. So first of all, I do think that this is a much bigger piece of the pie than many people think. And that's why we also need to change our thinking. You know, it's not somebody calls it champagne, you know, it's the champagne of the energy transition. After we've done everything else, then I will do a bit of hydrogen, expensive, complicated, etc. No, it's not. This is actually a crucial element of our future energy system. As Jorgo said, it's, you know, it's a molecule, you can store it over seasons. If I look at Europe, we have 400 billion cubic meter of gas consumption, 100, so 25% is in seasonal storage. That is the type of orders of magnitude that we need to think in. Seasonal storage of energy is hard. You cannot do it in electricity, so you need molecules. I think hydrogen, again, is one of those things. So I do think that we need to give this a little bit more priority. It's just not, it's not a luxury, it's not a hard to abate sector thing where you can only do it when you've done everything else. No, it's a systemically important element. Now, then if I look at, so let's assume that we, after a lot of preaching and evangelism, we have more people that understand it, then what do? I think part of what we're missing now is, in policy making, is simplicity. If I look at, you know, in the past, when renewable electricity was really expensive, solar was expensive, what did Germany do? They made a feed-in tariff system. And the beauty of the feed-in tariff system, and now there's a lot of criticism about it, was expensive, and who's paying for it, etc. The beauty was the simplicity. It was a very simple law. It was about 20 pages on a piece of paper. Everybody that put a solar panel on their roof or in their fields, on the farms, they would get a fixed feed-in tariff for 20 years, and that made it immediately bankable. Now, with renewable electricity, you have a grid, so that is a system where you can do that. But I do think that the simplicity of that system, we can actually, copy elements of that also for hydrogen, where you basically, obviously because we don't have a hydrogen grid everywhere, I mean, that is also a process that will take time. You can then do that via a system of certificates, but just, basically filling the cost gap with a certificate and then socializing those costs in a very simple way. I think that is, a line of thought that I would really love to explore a bit further, but keep it simple. At the moment we have, the IRA with, you need to create jobs. We have contracts for difference. We have carbon pricing. We have CBAM. We have I don't know what. But there's way too many things. And part of the issue with that is that, it's not scalable. It's difficult. And the beauty of the feed-in tariff in the past was that it really simple. Everybody understood it, and that made it grow exponentially. Thank you.
Thank you. So you're feed-in tariff believers, and as you said, you're an evangelist. And do you think it's viable despite the fact that it's expensive? How can we make it simple with it is expensive?
Yeah, so the beauty about all of this stuff is that it's technology. So instead of going, digging something up from the ground, basically the resource is sunshine and wind and water, which is there, and then you use technology to make something useful out of that. Whether it's a solar, and the thing about technology is the more you make it, the cheaper it gets, and then you deploy it more, and then it gets even cheaper. So that forward, enforcing loop of technologies, we've seen it with flat screens, we've seen it with mobile phones, computers, solar panels, and we're going to see it with hydrogen. So you basically then are going to see exponential growth based on deployment, because the deployment actually leads to cost reduction, because you can go to scale, you can manage your supply chain better, you can have some money for technical innovations to increase efficiency. All of these things happen, and then it gets cheaper. You deploy it more, it gets even cheaper, et cetera, et cetera. So in the end, it will actually be really cheap. So at the moment it's expensive because we're not making electrolyzers, but look at the solar panels. They're now really cheap, and electrolyzers will be cheap when we deploy them. So basically, what you need to do is let's say subsidies and quotas and support mechanisms, etc., until it's cost effective. That is based. So you have to be smart about it. I mean, now you have to spend money on it, but the more money you spend now, the quicker it gets cheaper. So if you go slow, then obviously that also takes long, because it's a volume equation. So we just need to, at the moment, unfortunately, need to throw money at it so it gets cheaper really, really quickly.
Thank you. And you mentioned that the bankability of the projects, and that brings me to my question to Mr. Chavarot. How can regulations, in your view, help mobilize financing for green hydrogen projects, and how green hydrogen projects can be bankable?
Thank you, Galia. And indeed, it's a pleasure to listen to you, Frank. And I think the reference you made to Desertec is very significant, because if we look back 15 years ago, we were, some of us, looking at how to implement and finance solar power at scale. And this is now taken as granted that it is relatively easy to do and relatively cheap to do. So there is some interesting analogy there. To your point and question about regulatory aspects, what's striking to me is that we're coming right after a panel on financing. And so unless there is a bankable regulatory regime, there won't be financings. I think what's interesting about green hydrogen is that you need two kinds of regulatory regimes. You need the domestic regimes, and I'll come back to that in a minute, but you also need, whether they call them international regimes or indeed export market regimes, because this is a product that is meant to be traded and sold internationally. And perhaps that's one of the key differences with renewable electricity, is that it's not primarily sold domestically. It is meant to be a global market, commoditized, and so there may just be one price around the world for certain hydrogen derivatives. And so how do we pay for that? How do we achieve a price that is sufficient to provide returns for the developers? That's a separate issue. But two aspects I want to emphasize in relation to regulatory regimes and finance. One is perhaps similarities with other energy infrastructure projects, and then separately the unique challenges posed by green hydrogen. So if we think about similarities with large-scale energy infrastructure projects, they too require solid regulatory regimes. They too, if I think of LNG, for example, require large investments, which can only be mobilized if there is a stable investment framework. There needs to be an ability to import equipment and to export the products. So there's an inherent international aspects of green hydrogen, which again is similar to other forms of perhaps conventional energy. These aspects are regulated or captured into some form of domestic regulatory regimes, which make the projects bankable or not, as the case may be. And then third important aspect, which is similar to other energy infrastructure projects, is the role of the state. The state is there to set the rules. It's there to authorize projects. Is there to enable common infrastructure, and indeed it's there to allocate some of the economic benefit that is generated by these projects. That can be done through, for example, domestic hydrogen codes. It can be done through legislations, but it can also be done through host government agreements if we take the analogy with the LNG sector further. So this is the first set of aspects that need to be captured into a domestic regulatory framework to make the projects bankable, which I know in many countries is happening. It's in development, but I think the litmus test will come, as and when these projects try to reach financing as to whether the underlying regulatory regimes are indeed bankable. And then in terms of unique challenges, and that is indeed what makes, I think, green hydrogen distinct from, say, wind and solar. One is that this is a nascent market that still requires market access and price support mechanisms. You mentioned feed-in tariffs, Frank, that in these some elements of price support is needed, if not subsidies, but there's also the issue of market access, and that needs to be somewhat regulated. And we can talk a bit about this later, but the EU, for example, is spending a lot of time on that. And then and I'll stop there, the other important component is the implementation of international standards. What constitutes green hydrogen versus non-green, and what would that mean for trade and market access on one hand, but also for mobilizing finance on the other, in terms of green instruments that may be part of a taxonomy that can be used to finance these projects, and indeed lower the cost of capital. Because one of the things that we also need to realize, as was mentioned in the previous panel, is that these projects are very costly, they're capital intensive, and therefore the more we can lower the cost of capital, the more economic they will be.
I have another question. In your view, why should regulators treat green hydrogen projects differently from energy projects that have been developed? I've seen the first energy projects, renewable energy projects that have been developed in Morocco, that have been they've been developed with the support of the state. And my question is, do you think that we would need state support also for green hydrogen projects?
It's a pretty open question. I think the answer is yes, and the state support again can take different forms. I think there's in some ways all kinds of enabling activities that a state can and should take to help develop the projects in country. There can be some form of financial subsidy mechanisms. There can be some form of industrial policy that helps, as we've heard this morning, the development of industrial clusters to, again, enable the green hydrogen industry to take hold in the country, particularly in Morocco. And equally, in terms of export markets, there needs to be, as I alluded to, some form of price support mechanism. That can make many different shapes and form. One thought that I would throw out here is a notion of pulling capital by, say, G7 countries to underpin the debt service abilities of projects that would sell green hydrogen to the EU and Asia. And if we can have a long-term price signal, which is sufficiently clear and transparent to Frank's earlier point, as well as sufficiently robust so that we know that debt can be amortized and repaid, that will somehow, I think, change the equation.
You mentioned the regulatory at the local level, but also at the international level. And that brings me to Mrs. Veronika Ertel. And my question for you is, how and do you think this is a good moment to think about cross-border coordination of regulatory framework between countries, and how this international cooperation and coordination can be implemented? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I think the answer to the question pretty much picks up on the aspects that have already been mentioned, both by both co-panelists. I think the first aspect is that it is a nascent market. It is a really quickly developing field with lots of potentials, but also lots of uncertainties in terms of costs of production, in terms of costs for transport, in terms of the end users, is where is the green hydrogen going to go that we're producing. So I think those uncertainties present a risk in terms of mobilizing the necessary investment for these projects, that we would need to see the scale up that we were hoping for, especially when we're looking at the long timelines of these projects. And particularly when it comes to everything related to export and trade of green hydrogen, which is what a lot of the strategies that we're currently seeing that are being in development focus on, then it's a central and crucial aspect that we need to advance on now is harmonization and then coordination across borders. We currently see that we have different efforts on the national, on the regional, on the international level to create certifications, both, for example, with the colors of hydrogens, if you have mentioned as well, but also national strategies that include the end usage of hydrogen and other aspects. And what we can see, and what I think is also very understandable, that these strategies actually look quite different depending on the preconditions of countries for the production, depending on geographical location, depending on the industrial base of each country. At the same time, we also see that basically all of these strategies have a strong import and export focus, depending on what the needs are. So we will have a lot of trade that is envisaged if the green hydrogen economy as we envisage it now is supposed to happen. Meaning that if there are discrepancies between different standards, this will make the export very, very difficult, and this will hinder the necessary investments in the type of the hydrogen we need. And this, I think, is the second point, and it's also been alluded to already. If we don't have a strong and visible certification of green hydrogen, which is the one we want to get to, then just looking at the current price differences of different colors of hydrogen, there is a risk of kind of a race to the bottom, right, of other forms of hydrogen crowding out green hydrogen that we actually want to push and scale up as an industry and as an economy. And this is why I think it's so important that we get to a point where there is a harmonization of certain standards and then certifications. Of course, and I'm also not telling anybody anything new when I say that, we know that international harmonization of standards is not something that's easily done, quite to the contrary. It might be a bit easier when it comes to standards that are more on the operational side, that are a bit easier to agree on. But then standards that carry a more kind of political weight and geopolitical aspects, of course, become even harder to agree on. And then maybe moving to the second aspect of your question, or your second question, I think there is no way around enhanced dialogue to get to a point where we have this necessary coordination and where we can agree on certain standards that would allow for the cross-border kind of scale up of hydrogen economies. And this is, I think, kind of what we as the regional program Energy Security and Climate Change also try to do. We try to bring the relevant actors around the table, both in terms of public authorities, think tanks, private sector, to both analyze what the existing frameworks are, what we can build on, what kind of differences in visions and ambitions we also have between different players, and then to see where we can go from there, to see where we can kind of find common ground and how this can play into the development of the strategies that we're now seeing as being in the works. So I think, of course, the necessary precondition for it, and I think this is also what Her Excellency, the Minister, this morning alluded to, is an openness, right? It's an openness to this dialogue, to share experience and to also be willing to maybe open up a bit more than we would usually in those types of discussions, to actually get to a point where we can get this coordination.
Thank you. You mentioned the export, and my question is, in the context of designing national regulatory framework and policies, do you think Morocco should focus on the Moroccan market or exports, knowing that many investors here are interested in exports? And this is an open question to all of you.
I mean, I can share my 2 cents on it,
sure,
but I'm by
please.
far no expert
Please.
on,
I mean, it's
on
an
the
open
national
question, yeah.
hydrogen strategy of Morocco. I think in the end, there will need to be a balance. I do see a tendency in current discussions about national strategies to focus a lot on export. But that doesn't mean that for every country, that there aren't countries for whom this would be the right way. I mean, Morocco, geographically located and also with existing kind of connections to the European continent, as kind of the earliest and biggest import market, as we can see for now for green hydrogen, or at least what we estimate, has a strong case, I think, to focus on export without then kind of forgetting about their own industrial base and domestic use of green hydrogen, which I think there is a really strong case to also advance that, given that Morocco has an existing industrial base to build on in that sense. And maybe as a very shameless self-promotion, we are hosting a side event tomorrow on green industrialization in North Africa, where we'll have a lot more opportunity to discuss exactly this point of where we should focus on and what potential Power-to-X holds for industrialization in North Africa.
Mr. Rutte?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, to your point, I do think that green energy is, is going to be a major driver of industrialization, as we have basically seen in the last couple of centuries. Wherever there was, cheap and available energy, that's where industry developed, and this is not going to be any different. There's a case in point was that a year and a half ago we visited ThyssenKrupp Steel. They have 4 blast furnaces that they want to clean up, going away from coking coal to basically hydrogen. And they had this scheme of first one, then the next, and then the third and the fourth. Then they actually did a tour. So they came to visit me in Abu Dhabi. They went to Morocco to buy fuel for the hydrogen for the steel furnaces. What they ended up doing is basically they reached a final investment decision on one. So they're going to convert one. But for the second one, they're now looking for a location. So within a year, you see that this is actually not just science fiction, it's actually happening. So they are going to look, to build basically, offshore steel production. Obviously, Germany doesn't want to do away with the car and the wind turbines, etc. So you'll still have steel and steel-related industries. But you see this happen. So this is not something that it's science fiction. It's happening, and it's the major opportunity that this stuff has. Whether then, how do you phase that? Whether, Morocco is going to, for example, put all their eggs in that basket, make green steel, make green cars and all of that. When Europe is next door and crying for hydrogen, so that's just a question of timing. What do you do first? And there's nothing wrong with making some foreign exchange, having a secure off-taker, and then build on that your domestic industry. But I do think both will happen.
Thank you.
Yes, I would echo that. I think from CWP's perspective, we like to think that having both a domestic use of the product as well as international export is a good thing. It's a question of balance. It depends on price incentives and demand signals. But just to give you an example, CWP is developing essentially the largest green hydrogen project in Australia at the moment, called the Australian Renewable Energy Hub. And the first phase of that project is dedicated to the domestic market, selling to the mining industry in Australia, prior to then embarking on the second phase, which will be an export orientated phase.
I think we're running out of time. Just before we end up our session, if 3 takeaways to all, our audience, what could you say on policies for green hydrogen? What should we do in Morocco?
Yeah, well, to my point, keep it simple. So in that sense, if for policies, just make them simple, because those are the most effective ones. The second one, we didn't really touch upon it much, but I do think focus on infrastructure. Infrastructure takes time. I mean, the IEA recently figured out that now takes 10.2 years in the United States and America to build an overhead power line. You can build a wind farm in a year or 2 years, same for solar. So focus on infrastructure, because that is then, an enabler for more renewable energy and hydrogen.
Including the grid.
Well, it's both the grid as pipelines. I mean, there's not a huge difference. And then if you cross borders, it becomes even more complicated. So focus on that. That is, it's an important aspect of it.
I think for me, it would be don't reinvent the wheel. Change the wheel where you need to make it work for a new technology and for specific countries with their specific preconditions. Maybe as a second, I don't have 3. As a second, I would speak to the role of incentives. There will have to be incentives for this to see the scale up that we need for decarbonization, and it's not going to happen by itself, just as a gradual economy increase or development. There will have to be massive investment, and this investment will need the incentives to actually make it go there.
Thank you. May I have 4? Thank you. I think the first one is to have a sort of medium-term industrial plan and clarity as to how many projects, what capacity is going to be authorized over a 5 to 10 year period, and indeed perhaps have gating items through that period to see what's working or what needs to be adjusted. So clarity to position Morocco on the international green hydrogen map, and indeed continue to attract international developers. The second one is, as part of that, is to mobilize large-scale finance at attractive price. Something that is beyond the regulatory aspects, and wasn't quite mentioned in the previous panel. But if we are collectively, as the world, going to achieve the abatement objectives through green hydrogen, we actually need a quantity of finance that's been unseen in other energy transition areas over the past 10 to 15 years. And we need that sooner rather than later. And personally, the way that finance mobilization is being discussed in various international fora is, I don't think, on the right course to achieve that funding requirements at lower cost of capital. I think the third would be position Morocco as part of a number of green corridors with Europe, potentially with other parts of the world. That links to transport infrastructure and shipping. And then the fourth would be the development of an entire value chain. This was touched upon this morning, but it's about the industrial aspects linked to the development of green hydrogen in country.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your insights. Thank you for your ideas. I hope that was very helpful. Thank you, the audience, for your time and for being here. It was a pleasure. Thank you.